Everyone. Welcome to our Sunday program today. First of all, I feel very humbled and honored to speak in front of all of you. I have one of my mentors and dear friend, an older sister from Toronto, joining in today. So it's always exciting and nerve-wracking to speak in front of her. So thank you so much for joining this afternoon. And for those of you who hear me talk a lot, again, we appreciate you all joining today. It's the July 4th weekend, as we said earlier. And very often when I talk about Independence Day, I share the same line that July 4th, the day of independence here in the US, is a day for us to actually meditate on our dependence with Krishna, because without actually having any sort of dependence, we cannot be truly independent. So today is a good day for us to meditate. And with tomorrow being Ekadashi, we could use this whole weekend to meditate on Krishna. Without further ado, today we will be doing class on Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8, verse 8. And I want to share my screen here. What we will do today, because we have a little smaller crowd here on Zoom, I will read the verse, and then if anyone else would like to read the Sanskrit, maybe we can have one or two devotees read the Sanskrit, and then we will get into the rest of the class. So the verse is 8:8. Abhyasa yoga yuktena chetasa nanya gamina Paramam Purusham Divyam Yati Parthanu Chintayan. Anyone would like to read the verse?
Ryan will read, Mama, this one.
Abhyasa yoga yuktena chetasa nanya gamina paramam purusham divyam yati parthanu chintayan.
Thank you, Ryan. Anyone else?
Abhyasa yoga yuktena chetasa nanya gamina paramam purusham divyam yati parthanu chintayan.
Thank you, Prabhu. Anyone else would like to read the verse?
I will try to read, Mataji. Abhyasa yoga yuktena chetasa nanyagamina param purusham divyam yati parthana chintayan.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. We will read the word by word. I'll read the word by word and then the translation. Abhyasa yoga, in the practice of meditation. Yuktena, being engaged. Chetasa, by the mind and intelligence. Na anya gamina, without their being deviated. Paramam, the supreme. Purusham, personality of Godhead. Divyam, transcendental. Yati, one achieves. Partha, O son of Pritha. Anuchintayan, constantly thinking of. Translation: he who meditates on me as the supreme personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me, undeviated from the path, he, O Partha, is sure to reach me. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. In this verse, Lord Krishna stresses the importance of remembering him. One's memory of Krishna is revived by chanting the Mahamantra, Hare Krishna. By this practice of chanting and hearing the sound vibration of the Supreme Lord, one's ear, tongue, and mind are engaged. This mystic meditation is very easy to practice, and it helps one attain the Supreme Lord. Purusha means enjoyer. Although living entities belong to the marginal energy of the Supreme Lord, they're in material contamination. They think themselves enjoyers, but they're not the supreme enjoyer. Here it is clearly stated that the supreme enjoyer is the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his different manifestations and plenary expansions as Narayana, Vasudeva, etc. The devotee can constantly think of the object of worship, the Supreme Lord, in any of his features, Narayana, Krishna, Rama, etc., by chanting Hare Krishna. This practice will purify him, and at the end of his life, due to his constant chanting, he will be transferred to the kingdom of God. Yoga practice is meditation on the super soul within. Similarly, by chanting Hare Krishna, one fixes his mind always on the Supreme Lord. The mind is fickle, and therefore it is necessary to engage the mind by force to think of Krishna. One example often given is that of a caterpillar that thinks of becoming a butterfly, and so is transformed into a butterfly in the same life. Similarly, if we constantly think of Krishna, it is certain that at the end of our lives, we shall have the same bodily constitution as Krishna. We'll chant Mangala Charan prayers before we get started today. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurun Shri Utapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tamstajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pasyata Deshatarine He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhyo Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Langayate Girim Yat Kripatamam Vande Shri Guru Dinatarinam Namam Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Jayapataka Swami Niti Namine. Okay, we'll just read the verse. We're reading today discussing today from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8, verse 8. Abhyasa yoga yuktena chetasa nanya gamina paramam purusham divyam yati partanu chintayan. He who meditates on me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his mind constantly engaged in remembering me, undeviated from the path, he, O Partha, is sure to reach me. So the title of today's class is From Practice to Perfection. As I was meditating on a good topic to speak today, because I have spoken on the whole dependence on Krishna theme before, I was watching on YouTube the trials that are happening right now, or were happening last week for the Olympics. So the US national team was competing in various sporting events like gymnastics and shot put and long jump and all these sort of things to get the team that's assembled and representing America at the Tokyo Olympics later this year. And when I was watching some of the athletes, and particularly the gymnasts, because I love the gymnastic pieces, I was just reflecting on the amount of practice it must take to actually be able to land perfectly on the floor. One of the gymnasts, the US gymnast I really like, Simone Biles, she has a Facebook video, like a Facebook show that she does. And in that show, she kind of talks about that what we see, that 2-3 minutes of them performing these flips on stage, is actually a manifestation of a lifetime of her practicing to get there. So that kind of made me think about how, even though the end is just a few moments that we get to see in the spotlight, there's so much background work that happens. And it really made me reflect on the role of practice in our lives, especially in our bhakti. And wanted to speak today a bit about what does important significance of practice in our life and how practice can lead to perfection. Since we have a small group today, we're going to try to keep this as interactive as we can on Zoom. So please do put stuff on the chat. At some point, I will ask a few questions. So, please reply and we'll keep this engaging for the next 45 minutes or so. So this verse is in a very interesting part of the Bhagavad Gita, right? So obviously the first 7 chapters of the Gita have spoken. And in the 7th chapter of the Gita, I always say that that's Krishna's monologue in the Bhagavad Gita, because for 30 verses, Krishna just speaks. He doesn't let Arjuna get a word edgewise. So when the 8th chapter starts, Arjuna now has his opportunity. Okay, I want to ask Krishna my questions because he didn't pause for 30 verses. So Arjuna in rapid fire format asks 8 questions in the beginning of chapter 8. So Arjuna asks Krishna, what is Brahman? What is the self? What are fruitive activities? What is this material manifestation? What are the demigods? Who is the Lord of sacrifice? How does he live in our body? And how can those engaged in devotional service know you, that is Krishna, at the time of death? So these 8 questions are asked by Arjuna, and Krishna, in a very efficient format, responds to these 7 of these questions in verses 3, 4, and 5. Very quickly, he answers all of this. And then Krishna dives into explaining just the last question Arjuna asked. How can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? And answering that question, which is the whole of chapter 8, Krishna starts to tell Arjuna what happens at time of death and how what one meditates on, that is their end state that's going to be. So when you reflect on this point, you look at death as that pinnacle, right? That end of our entire life that we're preparing for is that final moment. Last week we spoke a bit about Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, who wrote this beautiful article about die before dying, which was one of his last articles. He was published prior to his disappearance in the end of June of 2005. So that's if that is the end, then what is happening leading up to that pinnacle moment? What effort are we doing kind of getting up to there? So Krishna in this verse, in not just this verse, leading up to this verse, Krishna tells Arjuna that whatever one thinks about at the time of death, that is what the end state is going to be, and he guarantees that. So in this verse, he starts recommending to Arjuna that it's best if they think about Krishna, if they think about Supreme Lord, and meditating on him as a Supreme Personality Godhead and constantly remembering him, and that is going to be beneficial for the person at the last moment. So while telling Arjuna on how they can meditate on Krishna at the time of death, Krishna begins the word with abhyasa. Abhyasa, Srila Prabhupada translates that as practice of meditation. But we often know abhyas, and this is used in various languages in India, whether it's Hindi or Telugu or any languages, it's used as a form of practice or study, right? And this kind of goes to show that Krishna is emphasizing about this practice of meditation. Now, from an English language perspective, it's important to note that there are 2 kinds of practice. There is a practice with a C, and there's a practice with an S. Does anyone know the difference between the practice with the C and a practice with an S? Hint, it is not American and Canadian difference. There is actually a difference between practice with the C and practice with an S. Does anyone know the difference?
One of them is a verb and the other one is a noun.
Very good, Kuru. Exactly that. The practice with the C is the noun, and practice with the S is the verb. So today we're actually going to talk about how do we practice the practice. So how do we do the practice with an S to practice with the C, because they're connected. So in this verse, Krishna is talking to Arjuna about practice with the C, that the abhyasa, the practice of meditation, is what can help one, right? But what is important here is understanding is that without realizing that there's a verb attached to this, without actually practicing the practice, we're never going to be able to get to the practice. It's a very confusing sentence, but that's reality. Without actually practicing with an S, we will not be able to get the practice without the C. So Krishna here very interestingly uses the word abhyasa, practice of meditation, when he's talking to Arjuna. He doesn't just tell Arjuna that, meditate. The word abhyasa is very significant here. And it's significant because Krishna here is telling Arjuna, and in that process telling all of us about the importance of practice, the importance of practice with an S, the importance of us actually working this process. This doesn't happen overnight. Bhakti will not happen overnight here. That there is this journey that each of us are taking. And that journey sometimes is more important than the immediate result or even perfection of this process, because it's the journey in which we get to experience various aspects of it. It is a journey where we experience success and failures. It is in that journey where we're going to experience challenges in our bhakti. So it's important for us to focus on this journey. So by focusing on the journey versus the end result, a few different things happen, and we'll talk more about that here. The other significance of practice is that if you have to do something, and someone tells you need to do this today, if you've never done this before, how are you going to do it on that day? So when Krishna is telling Arjuna, you need to practice through this practice of meditation, It's because Arjuna has practiced meditation his whole life. So when Krishna is telling him that, for Arjuna, who is such a pure devotee, that's natural. He's practiced it, right? It's somewhere, it's like even if he had forgotten at that moment, it's somewhere there. But for all of us who haven't practiced it yet or do not know how to practice it, it is very important for us to actually practice. It's very important for us to be able to practice with the S, is to work on meditation, work on remembering Krishna more and more. Because if we don't do it throughout our life, how will we do it on the last day, right? It's like today, if I tell Ryan, today for Nishinga prayers, along with singing, I want you to play with one hand, play the harp, and with an other hand, I want you to play the mridanga and use your mouth and play the flute at the same time. Ryan, could you do that? No, right? It's not possible. But if you practice at least for a few years, I'm pretty sure you could do it, right? And that's the role of that, right? If someone is asked to do something the last minute, we cannot do it. And that is why, the process of bhakti is such a journey, right? Prahlada Maharaj in Srimad Bhagavatam says, Kaumara Acharet Pragnu. He talks about how this process of bhakti is taught at a young age, because it takes that long for us to kind of be able to get to the stage of like, the more and more we do it, the more and more we repeat something, the more and more we engage our time, energy, resources, and something else in that singular focus, we're able to progress in our bhakti. And Krishna consciousness is nothing but a lifetime of practice and preparation. We see this in the role of Srila Prabhupada. In the life of Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada practiced for so many years before coming to the West. Very often, there is this, when we hear about Prabhupada's pastimes, there could be this misunderstanding that, it's like Prabhupada just, we tend to romanticize Prabhupada's journey sometimes, right? We talk about Prabhupada was on the Jaladuta and he had this stroke and he had a heart attack and he came to Boston, and it's, and it's true. All of that is true. But what we forget to talk about is what happened before Prabhupada got in the Jaladuta. Prabhupada's, if we read Lilamrita, which I highly encourage devotees to do, if you do not have the 7-part volume of Lilamrita, please get one set, because reading the first, and I'm saying this from personal experience, and not to go too much on a tangent, I've read the condensed version of Prabhupada's Leela many, many times. But it was only a few years back that I started reading the full 7-volume Lilamrita for the first time. And I'm still reading it. But when I read the first volume, I just after I finished the first volume, I just broke down, because it is so, we sometimes forget Prabhupada's struggle, but Prabhupada practiced. Prabhupada was preparing for this penultimate journey. Prabhupada didn't know what was going to happen when he got off the shores in Boston Harbor from the Jaladuta. There was no a roadmap, or it's not like Krishna sent him an email saying, hey, if you take Jaladuta and do all of this, I will give you all of this. No, Prabhupada had no he knew something. He knew Krishna would work his miracles. That was his faith in Krishna, but he practiced. His endeavor was so sincere. So it's very important for us to realize that this process of Krishna consciousness is nothing but a lifetime in preparation, but a lifetime in practice. So we have to dedicate our entire life to actually practicing this process of bhakti. Practicing is meditation, because the more and more we practice, the more we are able to actually meditate on the Supreme Lord. And as Krishna says in this purport, that we are able to constantly engage in remembering him, and we're undeviated from this path of bhakti. And when that happens, Krishna, in one of those verses in the Gita, here also Krishna is saying he's sure to reach me. Krishna is giving an assurance of someone who practices meditation, practices with an S and a C, is surely able to reach him when it is done undeviated. So the saying, the very common saying in our English vernacular is, practice leads to perfection, right? We've heard this many times. When I started giving the analogy of the athletes, that's what it is. The more you practice, the more you are going to become perfect, right? And this is a common thing. We hear it in school, we hear it at work, that the more effort you put into something, the more closer you are moving the yardstick to perfection. In Mukundamadla Stotra, which is a beautiful, beautiful composition by King Kulashekara and translated by Srila Prabhupada, King Kulashekara is one of the alvars of great saints from the Sri Sampradaya. And in this book, in this stotra that he composed, which was very dear to Srila Prabhupada, there's in verse 46, I believe, 46, King Kulashekara says, Pranamam Ishaya Shirafalam Vidu Tadarchanam Pani Falam Divakshaha Manafalam Tad Gunatattva Chintanam Vacha Falam Tad Gunakirtanam Buddha. The wise inhabitants of the heavenly regions know that the perfection of head is to offer prostrate obeisances to the Supreme Lord. The perfection of the life breath is to worship the Lord. The perfection of the mind is to ponder the details of his transcendental qualities. And the perfection of speech is to chant the glories of his qualities. So King Kulashekara in his Mukundamala Stotra is defining perfection for us. So Krishna in Bhagavad Gita chapter 8 has defined practice, and King Kulashekara is talking about what is perfection of this practice. The perfection of this practice here, he talks about how the people who are living in these heavenly planets, these wise inhabitants of these heavenly planets, they've mastered the perfection. I'm sorry, my computer was about to fall. They have mastered the perfection. And in this way, they've mastered the perfection is that they know how to use every limb of their body to serve the Lord. In Srimad Bhagavatam, in many of the prayers, whether it's Bhishma Dev or Gajendra or Kunti Devi or Vritrasura, they talk about how do we use our body, mind, and words in the service of Krishna, right? And that is the perfection of our life, is to be like Bhishma Dev, who is saying when he's looking at Krishna's form, saying like, please help me engage my body, mind, and words in your glory. Kunti Devi says the same thing too. It's like these pure devotees of the Lord have achieved the perfection, is they know how to use anything that they have to serve the Lord, in pleasing the Lord, in offering themselves to the Lord, whether it is their heads, whether it is their life breath, whether it is their speech, whether it is their thoughts, their mind intelligence. So this level of perfection is stated in our Shastras, Srimad Bhagavatam, Mukundamala Sutra. Is this level of perfection easy or hard?
It's not easy.
Sorry, Prabhu, what did you say?
It's not easy. It's hard.
It's not easy. It's hard, right? To think about, like, just like even a simple thing about thinking that the perfection of the life breath is to worship the Lord means you were always thinking about worshiping the Lord. Like, it's not possible, right? When I'm driving in I-35 traffic, which refuses to move, I'll be very honest and admit Krishna is not the first person that comes into my mind. It's the car that does not seem to follow the rules and just cut lane by lane by lane. That's the person I'm meditating on at that time, and not really good thoughts about the person. But we can't use our life air all the time to think about Krishna, right? So just one simple thing, it's hard to do. And the thing is, because King Kulashekara is so merciful, he gets that. He knows that it's hard. So then he makes it easier by giving another definition of perfection, which is a very, very popular verse quoted by many speakers. And the verse is the 25th verse of Mukundamala Sutra. The verse goes, Majjan mana phalamidam madukaita bhare mat prarthaniya mananugraha esha eva tvad bhritya paricharaka bhritya bhrityasya bhritya itimam smara lokanatha. Translation is very beautiful. It goes, O enemy of Madhu and Kaitaba, O Lord of the universe, the perfection of my life and the most cherished mercy you could show me would be for you to consider me the servant of 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 your servant. Bhritya paricharaka bhrityasya bhritya itimam smara lokanatha. So King Kulashekara here is telling so beautifully that the perfection of his life is to be considered as to simply serve the servant of 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 the Lord. Just to serve this true servant of the Lord is perfection. Even though the standard has been set lower by King Kulashekara for us on what perfection actually means here, it's still not very simple. But the method of achieving perfection, whether we want to follow the standard of perfection that he has given us, the yardstick that is done by pure devotees that engage their body, mind, and words, or to be a servant of the servant of the servant of the servant of the servant, both of these require one fundamental thing, which is practice. Unless we make a habit out of this, there is no way we're going to get there, right? Because even to serve somebody unconditionally and realize that my job here is just to serve and not to question, and it's pure surrender, unalloyed service and unalloyed surrender, is hard. But the only way we can do it is by practice. is by cultivating this in our habit that our principal goal here is to surrender to the Vaishnavas. Our goal here is to serve the Lord through his devotees. But we can only do that by reminding ourselves and by practicing service. Just by doing lip service and saying, oh, I'm the servant of the servant of the servant, I'm dasanu 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 das. Sure. But are you really being a dasanu 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 das, Are you really being like that? Because if you're not able to do that, then just saying you're that is not sufficient, And we've seen many encounters of this, that sometimes it's very easy to say, but very hard to actually put in place. Like, do you truly feel like that? I remember hearing this past time, and I cannot remember by which Prabhu was telling that in the class. Like, they were saying that they would just say someone's name, like initiate a name, and their spiritual master would correct them and say, it's not so and so, you're so and so thus. Like, you have to remind yourself that you're the servant, and not just you're the servant of 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 the servant. Like, it's not easy to do. It's not easy to be in servitude of somebody unless you make a habit of it, unless you practice it, unless you actively figure out, what can I do to serve the Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis of this world? Because unless we have a plan of service, we are not going to be able to get perfection. And we have to plan, and practice is a part of that plan, is how to serve. So whether we want to completely become like Bhishma Dev and Kunti, or we want to be the servant of the servant of the servant, we have to practice, because the more and more we practice, the more and more we are making progress to this idea of perfection. Krishna consciousness, that's why Krishna consciousness needs to be the practice with an S. It's a verb. Krishna consciousness is not static. Bhakti is not static. And you can know that bhakti is not static simply by the definition Srila Prabhupada has given us for bhakti, right? Prabhupada does not translate bhakti as devotion. How does Prabhupada translate bhakti as?
Loving devotion.
I'm sorry, Prabhu?
Loving devotion.
Loving, yes, and there's another word Prabhupada uses for bhakti.
Loving devotional service, actually.
Yes, Prabhu, exactly. Prabhupada uses devotional service. And that immediately goes to show that bhakti is not a static process. Bhakti is service. It is dynamic. It is doing something. Because if you don't do it, not making the practice and the effort to do something, then bhakti becomes not just static, it becomes stagnant, right? So that is why in our devotional service, a lot of the things we do involve actually doing something. So it's very dynamic, and it's a verb. In the purport, when Prabhupada is talking, in this particular verse purport, Prabhupada is talking about chanting, and Prabhupada is talking about how simple this process is, right? It is simple. And he talks about how when you start chanting, you're able to engage all your senses automatically, and how easy this mystical meditation is. So we've established that there is practice, and we've established what perfection is, and we've talked about how practice leads to perfection, right? This is all, now we've all talked about the theory of what Shastra says. So now let's actually go down a little deeper into what does this mean for us. Prabhupada is saying that practice is very easy. Meditation is very easy. How many of you think this is actually very easy? See Tarshan Prabhu shaking his head. Prabhu, would you like to elaborate? Do you think this is easy or not easy?
No, by theory, I would say no, easy, Mataji, but person like me who are new in this practice, I think, focusing and meditation itself requires a lot of effort, because the mind, goes left, right, anywhere. So I keep trying to focus, I'm in that path to where I can more and more focus. So it's not easy, but the Prabhupada and Krishna has given, the process easy, like, at home, at any time, any sleeping, waking up, you can constantly remember. So that process has been given easy, but meditating on that one and focusing is difficult part.
Very well said, Prabhu. You kind of skipped ahead to a few points in my class, but that's always a good thing. So what you said actually is exactly correct. The process is actually easy. The practice of the process is where the difficulty lies in. The process is easy. The practice with the C is easy, But the practice with the S, which is actually following the process, is very difficult. And this is across the board. There is very, very, very difficult for us to actually practice this sometimes, even though we've heard so many instructions on this, right? Today, what I'm sharing is nothing new. All of you here, I'm very fortunate to know all of you in person and on the Zoom, and all of you have been practicing bhakti for many, many years, right? Decades. We're not talking, everyone has been doing bhakti for at least decades here. So you know this, right? But this process is not, it's actually easy. The practice starts to get hard. And I have had experiences where I've often asked myself, if practice makes perfect, and that means that the only way for me to achieve perfection is through practice. If the practice itself is so hard, then what to speak about perfection? How can I attain perfection if the method to get to perfection itself is so hard, right? Like imagine if you had to go to a particular, like an amusement park, and in order to get to the amusement park, you have to drive like 4,000 miles and then take a ferry boat and then take like this chopper to get to that amusement park. Is it even worth it? Like then you question, right? Is it even worth going to the amusement park if the journey is so hard itself? And I have personally in my Krishna consciousness felt like that, that I cannot do this, that it's so hard. If the practice is so hard, what hope do I have? Like I cannot think about moving forward. And then the minute this happens, I can see my practice suffering more and more. I feel like I get into this like spiral, like this downward spiral. The kind of is just this whole process of bhakti is so hard. Like, why is this so difficult, right? That I'm practicing so much, I'm chanting for so many years, but I feel like I haven't moved a yardstick. I am where I am as a devotee. I have not progressed in my bhakti. It's just like I've been doing all of this effort. Where is the result? Like, why am I not feeling perfection? Like, why, after chanting for so many years, why am I not feeling what King Kulshekar Alvar is talking about in Mukundamala Stotra? Why do I not feel that perfection of life? Neither do I feel like I'm a servant to the servant to the servant to the servant. Not definitely, I don't feel like my life breath is being used in Krishna service. Like, I'm nowhere on the yardstick. Why? Right? It is such a demoralizing feeling. And then when we hear pastimes from Srimad Bhagavatam about Bharat Maharaj, for example, who spent his entire life practicing and then looks at one deer and that's it, his whole life is gone. It's like, wait, what? Why is Bhagavatam also validating my like downward spiral? That what is the point of all of this practice, right? And it can take us into a very, very, very dark space. It can take us into a very scary space in our Krishna consciousness. But it's important to realize that the reason we are getting stuck in that space is not because of the process. It's not because of the practice either. We get stuck in that space because of a quest for perfection. We have this, as human beings, we have this tendency to want to be perfect, right? But actually, we are not meant to be, we're imperfect. That is why we're here in this material world. If we were perfect, then going back to the verse by King Kulashekara, our mood would be very different. We would be the wise inhabitants of these heavenly planets if we were perfect. But we're not. We're here in Bhumandala. We're imperfect. We have to use our imperfect senses. I'm seeing Gaurav Prabhu's really nice message, bhakti serving the Lord of the senses through these senses. But we know our senses are imperfect. So how do we serve the perfect Lord through these imperfect senses? Is accepting our imperfections, accepting that we are not perfect, accepting that we are banarthas, accepting that in our quest for wanting to be perfect, we are losing the process. We're losing the practice. I've had this experience myself, and I've had devotees share this with me, that it happens a lot when we begin chanting. Is when you read about or you hear about how bliss chanting is supposed to give you, I have found in talking to people, and for most people, I don't want to generalize it, for most people, the journey is very similar. When you first start chanting, you feel extreme bliss. Like you do not want to put your beads down. Like there is so much of like this unadulterated flow of joy that happens when you chant Hare Krishna mantra. And you think, wow, this is so wonderful. I want to keep chanting. But then the more and more you chant after that, you will notice sometimes that the bliss is not the same as what you felt in the beginning. You think that the bliss would increase, but at some point you feel like, it just plateaued or it decreased in some cases, right? Was my experience at least. The amount of joy I felt when I first started chanting, I pray that I can go back one day to feeling that same joy, but it doesn't stay. And then you realize is that because when you start chanting, Krishna is giving you a taste of how it's actually going to be when you get to that stage. And then after he's given you the taste, the rest of it he leaves up to you. You know now how it's going to taste like. Are you going to make the effort to get to that level back up? That's our choice, right? We're given that choice with our chanting. Do you want to make that effort to get there, right? But very often you get through the stage where I've experienced this, and again, people have shared this with me as well, is like, I'm not able to chant perfect rounds of japa. That I chant my rounds, but I don't feel like they're good, or they were just not good. So it's better for me not to chant. Because it's better for me not to chant, because what is the point if I'm chanting with distractions, or what's the point if I'm not able to feel the taste in chanting? It's better not to chant. And this is when this happens when we get into this funk or this downward spiral, where we think that perfection is the goal. That if I'm not able to get to that goal, then something is wrong with me, without realizing all the time that maybe something is not wrong with you. You just need to keep practicing, right? Our brains work in short term. We always think, and we're designed for that, right? Krishna himself says in the Bhagavad Gita that he is forgetfulness. Krishna has designed us in such a way that we tend to forget things. We don't remember what happened to us 2 days ago. We may not remember to us what happened to us 2 years ago, what to speak to 3 lifetimes ago. So when we're talking about this practice of bhakti, any sort of sadhana practice that we're doing, we cannot expect to get perfection overnight, because we are talking about conditioning, removing the conditioning from lifetimes ago. So when we find that the process is simple, but the practice is hard. The practice is hard is because you have to wipe out your conditioning from lifetimes ago, right? It's like when you work out, when you start working out, it's good for your body, but you feel so much of pain. I'm yet to meet somebody who tells me that the first day they worked out, after not working out for 2-3 months, that they felt, the endorphins just rushed in. They don't. If they're telling you that, they're lying. You're hurt in every inch of your body. Why? Because you haven't worked out for 3 months. You haven't been practicing. You haven't been putting the effort for 3 months. How is it that you're going to immediately pick it up? It doesn't happen. Your body itself reacts. And what to speak about lifetimes worth of conditioning? So whatever practice we're doing in this lifetime is a small blip in our entire life spectrum. So it's natural that the results you're going to yield are not immediate. So when we say that line, practice leads to perfection, it's important to note that it's not a practice today, get perfection tomorrow. I heard this in another class where devotees, asked this. I think it was given by Gopal Hari Prabhu, Radhakaman Prabhu's brother in Austin a few years back, where he said, devotees feel like when we chant, we are chanting like Prahlada Maharaj. We think we're in the same category as Prahlada Maharaj. Prahlada Maharaj was in difficulty. He chanted. Nrsimhadev came for him. I've been chanting for so many years. Prahlada Maharaj was only 7 years old. He had only 7 years worth of chanting. I have 20 years worth of chanting japa. Why Krishna is not coming for me? But then we forget that Prahlada Maharaj stayed in the womb of his mother for 1,000 years until he finished hearing Srimad Bhagavatam from Narad Muni, and then he decided to come out. That was Prahlada Maharaj's devotion. We cannot even compare ourselves to Prahlada Maharaj, because look at his caliber and look at our caliber. But that's how we feel, right? We feel that our practice entitles us to perfection. We feel that by little practice that we're doing, Krishna has to come. And if Krishna doesn't come, then why am I practicing? What is the point of all this, right? When we ask the question, what is the point of all this? That immediately means we are not understanding the point of this. Because the point of our practice of bhakti is actually not perfection at all. So if you join today's class because the title was Practice to Perfection, I want to give you the twist in the class is that practice is not about perfection at all, actually. In bhakti, practice is not about perfection. In bhakti, practice is about the practice. in bhakti, practice is more important than perfection. It is more important for us to experience this journey, because in this journey of practice, that is where we find purpose of our life. It is in this journey of practice is where we actually find true bliss, because it is only in practice where we experience success and failure, not in perfection. By definition, perfection is only success. There is no failure. Right? When you look at pure devotees like Kunti Devi or Bhishma Dev or even Gajendra, we may look at their life in a state of misery, like, and Kunti Devi is a very good example. You read about Kunti Devi in Mahabharata and in Bhagavatam, like how much suffering Kunti Devi had. Kunti Devi had, like, I don't think anyone would want to be in her position, a single mother at such a young age, having 5 boys to raise, not being given respect. She was a queen, and yet she was abandoned. She was, she had to move place to place, go incognito. She had to give up her young son when he was born. And then she had to see the entire family perish. And, she had to see her granddaughter-in-law be tortured and her great-grandson potentially killed by the Brahmastra. So Kunti Devi went through so much of suffering, and still, despite of all this suffering, she does not blame Krishna. In Kunti's prayers, which are the prayers that is when Krishna is leaving, and Kunti Devi is chanting to him, Kunti Devi says, like, you were there for me in all of these difficult times in my life, and now that it's done, you're just going to go away? How, Krishna? How can you leave? If anybody had a bone to pick with Krishna to say, look, I've been practicing so much, I've been doing so much of devotion with you, why am I still suffering? Why are you not making my life perfect? Kunti Devi doesn't say that. She felt the perfection of her life was that Krishna was with her in all of those difficult challenges. So to her, that was perfection. And which is why Kunti Devi says that very famous verse in Kunti's prayers, Vipatita Santutaha, where she says that, give me more calamities, Krishna, so I can meditate on it. I wish for more calamities so I can think about you. That's a deep thing, right? But very often that verse is quoted in the context of, like, devotees are so pure that they want difficulties. It's not that they want difficulties in life, but for a devotee, there is no difficulty if Krishna is there. So for a pure devotee of the Lord, perfection of their life is when Krishna is there. And that level comes only by practice. So for us, when we look at perfection, unless we practice enough, our view of perfection is warped. Our view of perfection is this idyllic state, right? But for the pure devotees, there is no idyllic state. If anything, Srimad Bhagavatam teaches us that a pure devotee's life from a material life is far from idyllic. It's far from perfect. There's so many miseries devotees have to go through. Just look at the villages of Vrindavan. These villages of Vrindavan, they're not ordinary people. When Krishna was there, they were not just ordinary random people. They were like demigods. They were pure devotees of the Lord that came onto this planet to give an opportunity for Krishna to perform his leelas. They were pure devotees of the Lord. They did not deserve to go through that much suffering. Vasudeva and Devaki, who had so much of good fortune to be parents of Krishna, did not deserve to go through that suffering. Pandavas, who were pure devotees of the Lord, did not deserve to go through that suffering. But they took the suffering and they never complained. Because for them, perfection of their life was that Krishna was with them throughout it. So perfection, it's the concept of perfection itself is wrong. But for us in this material world, when we think about perfection, we think about an ideal state, right? Like it's a perfect state where everything is just right. There's no misery, right? If you ask someone what is a perfect day, like what to them is a perfect day, in terms of weather, for example, most people's answer, I think, would be the same, where the temperature is just perfect, not too hot, not too cold, where there's the sun, but not super bright, where it's just enough clouds covering the sun, where there's that little cool breeze that is blowing through. Am I getting close? No one is going to say that my perfect day is when I'm buried in like 12 feet of snow outside my window. I mean, for some, maybe, but for most, I don't think so. No one's going to say my perfect day is like 50 degrees Celsius or 125 degrees Fahrenheit. No one's going to say that. We all have an idea what a perfect day is, right? But everything is ideal. And that the nature of everything being ideal sometimes affects our sadhana. Very often we hear the flip side of the whole thing, right? Like I just talked about how sometimes devotees in the quest for perfection say that, I'm just going to give up practice, right? Sometimes the reverse happens, is that you wait for that perfect moment to say, oh, when the moment is right, that is when I'll become bhakti. When the life situation is perfect for me, that is when I'll become a devotee. Now, Mataji, I can't chant right now because I have all of these responsibilities. I'm just going to wait till my son goes off to college, until my daughter goes off to college, and my house is paid off, and my work becomes a little bit more. I have only like 4 hours of meetings a day, and I don't have to worry about all of this. Then I'm going to sit and chant. How many times have you heard that bhakti is not for young people, it's only for retirement? That we're not supposed to be practicing devotional service when we're young, only when we retire, because people say, oh, when we retire, I don't have any worries. What, then if we think we don't have any worries, Krishna throws a, googly at us and sends something called coronavirus and completely destroys the whole thing, right? So working towards perfection or waiting for perfection is a complete myth. That doesn't exist in this material world. So what we can do is not to remove perfection from the equation and focus on the practice, because there is so much of joy in this practice of devotional service. Bhakti is meant to be joyfully performed. Bhakti is meant for us to experience joy. If we are not experiencing joy in devotional service, then the question has to be asked, where am I missing in my practice? Because the beauty is in the process itself. It is not in the end result. There is definitely beauty in the end result, but we don't know what that beauty is like in the end result, in practice, right? We talked about theoretically, we know because acharyas have described it as Krishna is describing it. So we know the truth, right? We know it, but experientially, it's hard to experience something, but we can experience the beauty in bhakti. Because the devotional process is it helps us see tangibly, am I feeling joy in this or not? And if you're not feeling joy in that, then we can step back and say, okay, what are my corrective actions? Because this is a practice thing, right? It is it's a verb, as we talked about. It is something that we're doing actively to help us feel better. So when you reflect on your best service experiences in Krishna consciousness, right? We all have it. Everyone here on this call has been in this movement, as I said, for some time. So we've all done some service, right? And take a moment, and we're gonna open it up for comments here, right? Take a moment and think about your best service experience in Krishna consciousness, where you were actively doing something, right? Whether it was chanting or leading a kirtan or cooking or cleaning a kitchen. Like, think of that one moment, your best experience. And if you have one, please share on, why was that particular experience so memorable for you? If anyone has something that they'd like to share, what was so memorable about that experience?
Haribo, I guess I can go.
Yes, Sanket, please.
So the favorite part of my bhakti is when in the morning, so I help my Gopal, I'm not sure, I do Shringar to my Gopal. So then I see him smiling so beautifully. I mean, that's very pleasing to me. I live for that moment every day. So I really like when he smiles on me, it's very blissful for me. So that's my favorite moment in bhakti.
So beautiful, right? So Sanket, I want to poke on your question. Do you enjoy dressing the deities more, or do you wait for the smile? Would you enjoy the smile so much if you didn't dress the deities yourself?
I mean, it's not like he smiles every day, but usually he's smiling. But sometimes he's well, it's good. I like serving him, I could say.
Do you like serving the deities, right? So it's serving. So the verb here is serving, right? Is when we serve Krishna, when we dress Krishna, when we do active service, we feel the joy. So the joy is in the service, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Good, very good example. I'm excited to see your Gopal this evening. And we will test if he's smiling or not. I'm sure he's going to be smiling. If your mom is making gulab jamuns, he's definitely smiling. Anyone else wants to share their most memorable or something that gives them joy in their bhakti, in their service?
So Mataji, I not cook most of time, but mostly in once in a month or kind of couple of time in a week, couple of time in a month. I always try to cook whatever I can make perfect. and serve the Krishna.
So wonderful, Prabhu. So it's the cooking, right? The act of practicing, serving, cooking gives us joy. Any other, thank you for sharing the Gopava, Prabhu. Any other devotees can share, like what gives you, what service makes you feel happy? Yesterday, we were at the Bhajan Sandhya, and we met Jackie, who came to our temple for the first time, and she came because of a book that she saw at a grocery store where we had placed books, and it made me so happy to just hear from her that she came to the temple because of Sankirtan, because of book distribution, that we placed this book months ago, and she picked it up from there and she came to the temple. Right. So the act of her coming, more than the act of her coming to temple, which obviously gave me joy, realized that doing the service of actually putting books there is where the joy is, right? That's where for me the happiness was. So very often when we reflect on the happiest moments in our Krishna consciousness, it's actually when we're doing service, when we're practicing, when we're doing something is where we feel the most joy, right? And the beauty of bhakti is that there's so many ways to do that. The Krishna and Acharyas have given us so many avenues to experience it. The beauty is in the practice. The beauty of bhakti is in the practice. The beauty of bhakti is in the journey itself, is in this process of experiencing bhakti. Attaining Krishna or attaining the perfection of life is almost it's almost like a byproduct of it, right? And when we shift our paradigm, that a paradigm is not so much as attaining Supreme Personality of Godhead, but our focus is our focus is experiencing the joy in the process, everything changes. We enjoy devotional service more because we're not stressed out about the result now, right? We're not stressed out about this idyllic state that everything is going to be just right, because it's never going to be just right. When we get to the acceptance that we're not perfect, this material world is not perfect, it's dukkale mashashvatam. So many places the material world has been described as dukkale mashashvatam in the Bhagavad Gita. In Bhagavatam, Brahma says, padam yad vibhadam natesham, like in every step there is danger. So many scriptures are talking about how this material, in Bhagavatam again, Kale dosho nidhi rajana ste ko mahangana, this age of Kali is full of laws. So we're establishing that we are not in an idyllic state at all. So to expect everything to go smooth, and only when it is smooth I'll practice devotional service, is a myth. To expect that immediately, just because I'm practicing devotional service now, I'm going to get perfection immediately, is a myth. And to give up bhakti, give up bhakti because we're not hitting that idyllic perfection state, is the most dangerous thing one can do to their own Krishna consciousness, because that is detrimental. To give up too soon is a problem. Coming back to that example of athletes, right? Imagine if an athlete, or if any sports person that you follow, gave up at the first try. If a gymnast, she's trying to do some crazy flip and she falls and she goes like, oh, okay, I fell, so I'm just going to give up and walk away. We won't get to witness that, right? If failure, which happens in practice, if failure is where we give up, then we are not strong enough to get to perfection. And that is why bhakti is a journey, and the practice part of it is so significant, right? Because one can often ask that if Krishna truly cared about us, why does he ask us to even do devotional service, right? If Krishna truly cares about us, we all should go back to Godhead. Krishna should make sure that we all go back to him, right? Why should we practice? If it's so important, he can make it a rule, right? That everyone goes back to him. Whether they practice or not, they go back to him. But Krishna doesn't do that. Krishna expects us to do our job, right? Why? Because he wants to know that we're committed. Why do pure Vaishnavas go through so much calamities? They go through those calamities because for them, A, it's not a calamity. They don't see it like that. But B, even if a calamity comes, they don't give up. They do not give up. They consistently practice. They consistently work on their Krishna consciousness. They consistently work on serving the Lord, right? So consistency in practice is the key. We need to make it a habit. And when we do this, we find so much of happiness, so much of bliss in devotional service, because you've taken away the stress of perfection, because it is very stressful, no? It's very stressful. I was hearing a friend of mine joke in a conversation joke that in school, you'd have all of these kids who would want to get perfect grades, right? Like I went to an Indian school, so it was all about marks. So you'd have these kids who want to get like 100 marks. And then you'd have these kids who'd be okay with like getting the 70, 80 marks. And then you look at them and you see the kids who are okay getting the 70, 80 marks, so sometimes happier in their life than the kids who are trying to get 100 marks. Why? Because the kids who are trying to get 100 sometimes were striving for perfection, which is hard. It's not easy, right? It doesn't mean you don't do it. It doesn't mean we kind of chill in our bhakti process. But what it means for us is we have to keep at it. We do not give up. We keep at it, right? We keep at it and we evaluate our bhakti as we go along. Are we moving forward or not? And the best way to know if we're moving forward in our devotional service is we will want to do more devotional service. So the perfection of practice of bhakti is more practice. We'd want to do more bhakti. And if we are not feeling the desire to want to do more bhakti, then we need to stop and think, why do I not feel like that? And that is why why do I not feel like that, right? And that is why when we chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, other than just glorification of Krishna, Srimati Radharani and Lord Rama, Lord Balaram, the chanting is please engage me in your service. So what does that mean? To please let me chant more. So the more you chant, our desire needs to, if we are chanting properly or we're doing service properly, then internally our desire would be to do more of that. And that's beautiful. So when we do, and if we are not getting that desire, I want to do more of this, then that's an important point for us to evaluate. Are we progressing further or not? So our progress should not be earmarked by, do I feel like I'm using my life breath in Krishna service? No. Our yardstick for progression is, do I want to keep doing this or not? Because believe me, when we feel like, when we're not progressing, you will feel it. You will know that you've hit this like plateau. You know you've hit this, you get into this rut where you feel like, I just don't want to chant, or I just don't want to read, or I just don't want to meet devotees. You can feel it. Krishna gives us that intelligence, the Paramatma within us who cares about us, helps us at that point. When our practice is struggling, Krishna will tell us that you're struggling. And Krishna is so kind that he will send people in your way, whether it is in person, whether it is through a Zoom call, whether it is through Prabhupada's books. Somebody will come in your way to help you evaluate your practice and see, maybe something is off in my practice. And how do you fix when something is off in your practice? How do you fix when something is off in your practice? Devotees? Sorry, Prabhu?
Do more devotional service.
Exactly. So the answer is so beautiful, right? When you're struggling in your practice, what do? Keep practicing. When you're practicing well and you think things are going good, what do? Keep practicing. Krishna has made this process so simple for us that it's not even like, it's not a complicated process. Everything evolves around the single thing that we just need to continue with our sadhana. We need to continue with our practice. And the more and more we do it, the more happiness we feel. And the less and less we do it, the only way for us to increase it in our heart is to keep doing more. So it's important for us to constantly check our own bhakti. Where are we at? Where are we at in our devotional practice? Are we wanting to do more, or are we not wanting to do more? And if you're wanting to do more, awesome. If you're not wanting to do more, what do we need to do to get more? And then meditate on the Lord, like Krishna, like I'm feeling this, like I'm feeling lethargic, but I'm feeling like I'm in a funk. I need to get out of this. How do I get out of this? And that's the meditation for us too. That is how we chant more. That is how we dedicate more of our life into being able to practice, right? And coming back to the examples of, of the athletes, that's what they do, right? They, every time they fail or they struggle, they just go back, evaluate and change and keep practicing. They keep practicing, and once they hit their markers, okay, I've come to this level, how do I up it more? Then they increase the level of practice. So we have to look at our own bhakti and say, okay, now I've hit the stage, now I want to go to the next level. Then now I practice more to get to the next level. All this while I was, reading 1 page a day. I've been doing this for so long. Let me improve my practice. Let me read 2 pages a day. All these days I've been listening to like class for 5 minutes a day. I've been doing this for like a year. I feel good. Let me up my practice now. Krishna helps us in that. When we make that endeavor to say, I want to improve, Krishna helps us by giving us an opportunity to improve our practice. But none of this will happen if you don't practice. I think it was the Canadian hockey player, I think Wayne Gretzky, who said, you make 0% of the shots that you don't try. It's like that. If we don't actually try, if you don't actually try, if you don't actually practice, there is no way we're going to be able to do anything. So it all starts with our practice and emphasis on how important it is for us to move forward in our Krishna consciousness. So when we actually limit our obsession with perfection and we focus on our activities, we are able to improve our sadhana more and more. And many scriptures have given us various ways to do this. And I know we're almost at time, so I just wanted to share two of my favorite methods for practice that, you know, in the scriptures that are talked about. Both of these, interestingly enough, happen to be mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita in Madhya Leela, chapter 22. So the first are the 9 processes of bhakti, right? Which everyone is familiar with. Prahlada Maharaj mentions this in the 7th canto, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also speaks about this in Chaitanya Charitamrita. And one activity that I have actually tried doing for some years is to meditate on my own devotional service and look, which of these 9 activities am I spending most of my time in? Right? If I find myself tending to lean towards one activity more than the other, then that becomes my focus area. Okay, let me try to do more and more of that. Or if I feel like I'm not happy in my devotional service, but then I look at like, where am I spending most of my time in? Then maybe I should, you know, go look in another form of bhakti. And that's why bhakti is so beautiful, right? It is not cookie cutter. My definition of bhakti, or how I practice bhakti, is very different than how Sankhet practices bhakti, or how Gopal Prabhu may do it, or how Necha Mataji may do it. But there's no wrong answer if you're following the 9 processes of bhakti. Some of us like to listen more. Some of us like to chant more. Some of us like to do deity worship more. Some of us like to recite prayers more. Some of us look at, like to serve Krishna as a friend. Some like to serve Krishna as a devotee, and that's okay. All of these are right answers because they're coming from parampara. So it's a nice way to just pause and evaluate, like in this pie chart, that if I had to make this very complex pie chart of all these 9 things, where am I spending majority of my time with bhakti in, right? To be very fair, you can even take the pie chart to one level further and say, in a day, in 24 hours, how much of time am I spending for bhakti? What's the tiny slice of bhakti time? And then in that bhakti time, where is my devotion going to? And then that's an immediate indication of what your practice is like, right? Where is your focus? So then that helps us evaluate where we need to gap out on. These 9 processes of bhakti are so beautiful. Mahaprabhu, when he's talking about this in Chaitanya Charitamrita, he talks about how there are many devotees who execute maybe one of these, may execute only one of these 9 processes. And even if they execute that one of these 9 processes, they can get ultimate success. And then he talks about how devotees like Ambarish Maharaj executed all 9 items. So there is no hard and fast rules. You do 1, you do 2, you do 3, you do all 9. It's perfectly okay. But the 9 processes of bhakti, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakhyam, Atma Nivedanam. Shravanam, hearing, Kirtanam, chanting, Vishnu Smaranam, thinking about the Lord, Archanam, deity worship, Pada Sevanam, worshipping the lotus feet of the Lord, Sakhyam, serving the Lord as a friend, Dasyam, serving the Lord as a devotee, Vandanam, offering prayers, Atma Nivedanam, completely surrendering our soul to the Lord. These are the 9 processes by which one can serve the Lord, mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam by Prahlada Maharaj and also Mahaprabhu in Chaitanya Charitamrita. So we can look which of these processes do we feel more connection with, right? And practically, these are all possible in our day-to-day schedule. Actually, like programs that Srila Prabhupada has given, and we'll talk a little bit about it in the next one. Programs that Srila Prabhupada has given allows us to do all of these 9 processes of bhakti in a singular fashion. For the most, if not all 9, at least half of them get covered in one. I was hearing this class where they were talking, Radhikaraman Prabhu was mentioning on how just by the morning program itself, half of these get covered, right? Like if you do a regular Mangalarti at home or a morning program, or attending our once a month morning program, once every 2 weeks morning programs, Shravanam, you're getting to hear the holy name through, devotees are chanting. Kirtanam, you yourself are singing. Vishnu Smaranam, you're thinking about the Lord. Archanam, there is deity worship that is happening. Vandanam, we are reciting prayers of acharyas. Then there is Dasyam, because you're serving the Lord in the form of the devotee. And then, if we do Abhishek or something like that, there is Pada Sevanam, because you're seeing the Abhishek happen. And hopefully, you get to the state of Atma Nivedana, completely surrendering to the Lord. So with just the morning, attending a morning program 4 or 5 of those 9 processes of bhakti are just taken care of as snap of a finger. That's how simple it is. That is how simple Prabhupada and our acharyas have made this process for us, is that just by doing what we're doing on a daily basis, but being keeping our paradigm straight in our head, that my goal is not perfection. My goal is to practice, and my goal is to practice more. We're able to relish this. Because just imagine if our paradigm, and I'm going to take one example here. Imagine if our paradigm was perfection and not practice, right? Hearing is a good example. And I know this because I used to get very frustrated, because I kind of feel like I want to listen to like so many classes a day, but I'm not able to get time to listen to all these classes. And I'm giving this analogy because, my friend Satyabhama is on this call, and she helped me get over this. Is I had this thing that I needed to sit down and listen to classes, and it's sometimes hard, with my schedule. With all of us, it's hard, like having to work, and then after work you have to cook and clean and stuff. So I shared that I can't listen to classes, and then she had suggested, like, what do you do when you drive? And I'm like, I listen to kirtan, and she said, why don't you listen to classes when you drive? Now, my obsession with wanting to perfectly sit and listen to a class, what did I do? I just didn't listen to any classes. But the minute the paradigm shifted, we're like, well, my goal is not perfection, my goal is practice. Then I started listening to classes when I started driving. And that was life-changing for me, because I started hearing the same class, and I came up with this system where I would listen to the same classes for 2-3 weeks at a stretch. And when you listen to the same classes for 2-3 weeks at a stretch, I can guarantee you, because even if you're a dull brain like mine, you will memorize that class, because you've heard the same class again and again and again. And then you can quote from the classes so easily because you've heard it so many times. So we do this now, well, not so much now because we don't drive as much, but both Rupa Sagar and I have classes in USBs, and sometimes we have the same class, and we get to just hear classes when we drive. So now you look at, that's a paradigm shift, right? So we look at our services that we do, or we have a desire to do. Let's switch the paradigm and focus on the practice, not perfection. Same thing for chanting prayers. Like we've seen Amarendra Prabhu do this so beautifully. If you ever have a good fortune of just being in presence of Amarendra Prabhu when he's not giving classes, the number of prayers he just chants from the scriptures, right? He'll chant songs, ashtakams, and different prayers very naturally, and he does it as part of whatever he's doing in the day. It's not that, he's like, okay, I'm going to allocate this 15 minutes, this perfect setting when I'm, fully like focusing on the supreme field, sitting in front of my deities and chanting. No, he does it all the time. Now, because he does it all the time, when he's in front of his deities, it's just natural for him to do so, right? So we have to really think about shifting our paradigm from perfection to practice. And it makes a huge difference, especially when it comes to 9 processes of bhakti. Another set of bhakti processes, if I may use, that are mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita, which I also like, are the 5 limbs of bhakti, which is given in verse 22-128. Sadhu Sangha Nama Kirtan Bhagavad Shravan Mathurava Shri Murti Shraddhaya Sevana. One should associate with devotees, chant the holy name of the Lord, hear Srimad Bhagavatam recited in Mathura, and worship the deity with faith and veneration. And Mahaprabhu says that these 5 limbs of devotional service are the best of all. Even a slight performance of these 5 awakens a love for Krishna. Look at that. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saying even a slight performance. That means by just practicing slightly those 5 things, one of those 5 things will awaken the love of Krishna in our heart. And we talked about earlier that the perfection of life is to use your life breath in meditation of Krishna, is to awaken the love of Krishna within your heart. So just by doing this light practice, we get there, right? And these 5 are so simple. Associate with devotees, chant the holy name, hear Srimad Bhagavatam, recite in Mathura, recite in Adham, and serve the deities. Earlier on, I talked about how the morning program, you can experience 9 processes of bhakti. Similarly, in morning program or any sort of arti that you do in your home, you get to experience all these 5 limbs of bhakti, right? Like when you're doing arti or a full morning program, you're associating with devotees in person or virtually. You are reading, hearing from chanting the holy name of the Lord through kirtan, through japa. You're hearing Srimad Bhagavatam that someone is going to speak. And wherever the holy name and devotees reside, that place is Vrindavan, right? Moraman Vrindavan, like that is where Mathura, Vrindavan is, holy places right there. And then you get to do deity worship. So again, our morning program is a very good encapsulation of these 5 limbs of bhakti. All of these that we're talking about today emphasize on the practice, right? that the best way for us to actually achieving perfection is to put the emphasis on practice. And the best way, this is also the best way to, like, juice the joy in bhakti. There is so much of joy. The only way we can juice the joy in bhakti is to relish the process. The more and more we relish the process, more and more excited we feel about it, the more and more we sink into our sadhana and feel the joy in bhakti, the more and more we're able to practice. The more and more we're able to practice here. And it is the more we practice, the more of this sadhana overflow that we experience, people see that. People see that overflow of sadhana. That's what inspires them. When someone, if you've heard or had that experience where someone may say, oh, you look so happy, or you look so blissed out, it's the overflow of sadhana that they're seeing. And so it's important for us that overflow of sadhana only comes with our practice here. So today, as we conclude the class, if I had the permission to rewrite the quote that says practice makes perfect, I'd like to rewrite it to practice leads to more practice, that leads to more practice, that leads to more practice. And it is in this constant practice cycle is where you have perfection of life. Jai, with that, thank you so much, devotees. Hare Krishna. If any questions or comments, I see Satyabhama Mataji, you have a comment, question?
Hare Krishna, thank you. That was so wonderful and inspiring, Masundari. Thank you for inviting me for this class. And I just, through the whole class, I was thinking of one thing, that my son had a teacher, a karate teacher, and he always taught that practice makes perfect. That's a wrong understanding. It's always practice makes more progress. So I think throughout your class today, you've made that point over and over again, that we should move out of this mind shift that we are practicing to achieve perfection. But practice only causes more and more progress. And the more you practice, the more progress there is. So thank you for reminding all of us of that. So we should never say practice makes perfect. Practice makes progress. Right? So that was one thing. And the second thing you reminded me is like one of the things I read a long time ago in Satchidanand Maharaja's book, The Art of Chanting, where he says that, gives that example of a person who's looking for a pot of gold, and it's on the top of the room at the top, and there are multiple steps going up to the room. And so he's going up on the stairs, and it's really hard. And when he climbs to the last step and he opens the door, he sees the gold. And when he looks back, he sees that every step was made of gold, but he just didn't realize that the perfection was right there on the steps. So our process of sadhana and devotional services like that, as we go step by step, that in itself gives us perfection. So we should not look for the pot of the gold at the end of the staircase, but it's right there, but it's just we don't see it. So we should focus on our practice, as you mentioned, like so eloquently. So it reminded me of that particular example, that it's right there, but we can't see the perfection. We should just keep practicing, and the perfection is inherent in the process. So that's not our goal. It's right there as part of our devotional service. So that was something that also I remembered when you were talking about this practice. So thank you so much. That was really, really wonderful to hear and inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Practice makes progress. It's beautiful. More condensed version of my my adaptation on that quote. So thank you for sharing that. Any other questions or comments?
So,
I think Edil Prabhu, you were saying something?
Yeah, actually you just mentioned about that in the initial part when a person tries to do the chanting, they feel the blissful feeling, right? After that, it fades off. I always had the question why people go through that stage, right? You clearly explained that one. Thank you for that. And I heard quite a bit of other people also, they says, there's a lull, always you see a lull in between the beginning and the end. So once you're not feeling that blissful, that means you're in the middle path. So that means you have to push much harder. So that means, you have to reach a little bit more higher in terms of consciousness and the service and the in terms of conscious, then you'll reach the end, then you feel the bliss again. Thank you for explaining. Haribol.
Thank you for sharing that, Edel Prabhu. One of my friends once shared with me a really good point. He said that every time he chants, he meditates on, he literally starts off his japa by saying that I pray to have the same amount of enthusiasm and the bliss that I had when I first started chanting, because it's happened, and I feel like we don't talk about it more often. Like, we don't tell people that, hey, you know what, like when you start chanting, it's so blissful, but it slowly starts to fade away. But don't freak out. That's normal. That's the boiling of the butter to make ghee, right? Like all the contaminants come out. That's normal. It's a good thing when that happens. That means you're actually progressing, right? But we don't talk about it. And then it kind of shocks you. You're like, wait, what? Bhakti was supposed to be so blissful. Chanting was supposed to, like, I should want to chant all the time. What just happened to me? It's normal. And it's kind of like just normalizing that changes how we look at devotional service. Thank you for sharing that point, Prabhu. I appreciate you sharing your realization. Any other comments, questions?
I just was reminded of one more thing is when you said in your class that we should constantly evaluate. I think one of the reasons we just like taper off in our services and everything is because we don't take time to sit back and reflect and evaluate. And that's one of the things that Vaisheshika Prabhu always emphasizes, that you need to measure. You need to measure where you are and go back and see what is it that went wrong. And I really liked your idea of making a pie chart. I'm going to try that and see where is it that the most inspiring or the most happy part of the service lies, and then focus more. Obviously, clearly, that is the area that you're going to thrive the most. So sometimes you do services because they're essential, but they're not necessarily the happiest ones. But it's really, really nice. I really loved your idea, and I'm going to use it, is to make that pie chart and see where is it that the happiness in the service is lying, because that's what's going to make us progress faster. So thank you for that.
Thank you for sharing about the pie chart. I can't take full credit for this because I read this book by this person called Pat Gelsinger, who was formerly the CEO of VMware, and he recently became the CEO of Intel. And he has this book called The Juggling Act. And anyone who works, I highly recommend you to get that book. So Pat Gelsinger is also a very staunch Christian, very strong, very, very devoted in his faith. So he wrote this book where he realized that in his life, when work, and he was having this hard time to find between work, family, and church, he was not sure where he was finding the joy. Like he could feel the stress. He started coming up with these tables of like, where am I spending most of my time in? Where should I be focusing in? And then where am I getting the most joy? So I really loved that idea that, he talked about it openly, like how we experience this, right? And I was like, there has to be a Krishna conscious adaptation for it. So it's kind of his version of it and Krishnized it for what we do. But please, it helps me. So I'm sure hopefully it'll help other devotees as well. Vaikuntesha Balaji Prabhu.
Mataji, thank you so much for this nice class. It kind of gives the real perspective of when we do the chanting or practice devotional service. Something that we learned from the highly evolved devotees is that they always think that they're still haven't reached the place. And we should not think that we have reached it. That is the main thing, that we still have to work. Other people may think that we have reached, but we in our heart, truthfully, we should not feel that we have reached the place. And you have pointed that out really nice, do more and more practice. Something that comes to my mind is about an example that I read at one time about, when people start out chanting, and sometimes they feel that, oh, I feel so headache, I feel this, I feel that. But what it is like, if you're starting to clean up a house, everything looks so beautiful, nice, and then you start cleaning and you see all the dust coming out everywhere. That is the kind of thing, the chanting brings out, the anarthas, and you realize, oh my goodness, I had all this. But slowly that diminishes, and finally you get the house cleaned, perfectly clean. but that time comes at a very late date. It's not immediate. But Krishna helps all the way. He always helps you. He says, whatever you lack, I provide, and whatever you have, I give. So keep faith in Krishna and keep going, keep doing it. Don't think that I haven't reached the perfection. Well, I'm doing something wrong. No, you are on the right path. Practice, practice, practice. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you for sharing that, Prabhu. You made a really nice point, and we didn't talk much about it today, but this idea of faith is such an important part of our practice, right? Is that we should not lose faith in Krishna just because we're not seeing immediate results. The results are there. I have often believed that, especially with our chanting, even when we, that's why we should never stop chanting, because even if we feel the results are not there, most often the results, we are not seeing it, but it's happening internally. Other people see it, and it's definitely changing our life. Because if you're not chanting, if you're not doing something right, Krishna with a snap of a finger can make in such a way where we will never chant for the rest of our life, right? Krishna can take away the desire from our heart instantly, but he doesn't do that. But he'll let us being able to chant again and again is a manifestation of Krishna's mercy. And I think that's why practice is so important, because you can't practice without faith. We have to have that faith in Krishna that, Krishna's got our back, right? We practice and Krishna's going to take care of us. Thank you for sharing that, Prabhu. Very beautiful, beautiful points. Any other questions or comments? Thank you so much, devotees, again, for giving an opportunity for me to speak today, and for participating in this conversation. And I pray that, with your blessings, because as I said, I'm not qualified to speak here. So many of you have been inspiration to my own Krishna consciousness, but I pray with your blessings, I can continue to practice more and more this path of bhakti. Satvik, over to you.
Thank you, Mother.